even on the job, you should still be continuing to learn. Go to the hackathon, do the tutorial, talk to some people. You can find a lot of people that are willing to answer specific questions. Don't do the whole let me pick your brain and not tell them what you're going to ask them. It's much better, especially if you're going to like cold DM someone on Twitter. Ask them specific questions about their job. You're much more likely to get an answer. There are a lot more options than it seemed like when I first got out of boot camp, right? Where they were like, well, do you want to do front end? Do you want to do back end? But as it turns out, the landscape of things you can select, things you can dive deep in on is tremendous, right? And now you have, you can be a front end engineer, you can focus on the UI, you can be a front end engineer who focuses on things like Node, and maybe you run a little more full stack. You could do backend, but that means several different things, including like, do you build big distributed systems? Do you do cloud? Do you do AI? Do you do ML? Like all of these things. And some of it's luck. Some of it depends on what opportunities are presented to you in your first couple jobs in tech. And some of it you can have some control over, whether you're advocating for yourself to move from one team or another because you want to work on one technology or another. It's just, you kind of have to lean into the chaos a little bit and try to make good choices for yourself, not just now, but make sure you can make good choices for yourself later too. So when my first job out of boot camp, my boot camp was a JavaScript program, right? Many of them were back around the time that I was doing that. And I started as a software engineer, was mostly front end. And then an opportunity arose to change teams to go work on a language that I had just learned called Go. And I advocated for myself and I got to move teams, and I became one of the first 4 engineers at Solar City to write Go in production. And that really set the course for the rest of my career, which led me to, distributed systems. And now I work in AI. And if I had stayed in JavaScript on the front end, my career path would have looked very differently. So some of it was the fact that that opportunity was even available. And the other part of it is me advocating for myself. So you need a little bit of both. This profession requires you to continue to learn constantly. Sometimes we overglorify that, and you'll see people that are advocating that people spend time on their weekends coding. I don't code on the weekends. I play competitive pool and I power lift. But even on the job, you should still be continuing to learn. And so that as you accumulate courses or whatever, you can gain some confidence in doing that. You can gain some confidence in side projects, but also you just have to try it, right? Go to the hackathon, do the tutorial, talk to some people, right? A lot of us really, really love sharing, how we got where we're trying to be and what it's like to do our day jobs. And you can find a lot of people that are willing to answer specific questions. Don't do the whole, let me pick your brain and not tell them what you're going to ask them. It's much better, especially if you're going to like cold DM someone on Twitter. Ask them specific questions about their job. You're much more likely to get an answer. And some of it's just, you just have to take the leap of faith. What's the worst that's going to happen? We are in an industry where if you've been somewhere for 6 months, nobody is going to ask you why you're leaving. We're witnessing people quitting their jobs without something lined up in like maybe the greatest numbers in like the history since the Industrial Revolution. And people are taking time off to pursue their hobbies. Like this is not an environment where hiring manager at the thing you're interested in is going to say, well, why didn't you stay there for a year? What's the worst that's going to happen? So you're going to get over there and you're going to realize you don't like it. Then you have a conversation with your manager and maybe they put you somewhere else. Maybe they support you while you figure out what you do want to do, right? Nothing bad is going to happen to you from taking a risk. And the further you get in your career, the more you will get an understanding of what you like to do and don't like to do. And you're more likely to take a risk that's likely to result in success than earlier in your career. But the risk is so minimal early in your career. What I advise people who are, if you're looking for your first job out of boot camp or, out of your CS degree or whatever, is to go somewhere where you can get a breadth of experience. Startups aren't necessarily the best place for folks like that, because you want to be able to work at a place where you could maybe be on a couple different teams and experience different things. But even if you do go work at a startup first, what's the worst that's going to happen? You can find another job in 6 months because you didn't know what you didn't know. Take the risk. It's pretty similar to if you're a career changer, right? And you're saying, I want to move from this career to this career. A great first start is to look at the job descriptions of the jobs you'd like to have in the future and categorize what you already know how to do and what you already have experience with and what you don't. And then start to figure out how to map that either in this is something I can learn on my own. This is something I can learn from a class. This is something I can learn at my job. Or this is something where I have some relevant experience and I think I could explain this to a potential hiring manager. You should hire me to do this, even though I haven't done this exact thing before. I have related experience. You can do that within your own industry too. It's not just for when you switch from one industry to another. I have worked with a person on my staff before who was looking to move into a data analyst role. And, the first step is for that person to go and research what are essential skills for data analysts? What does that look like? And how can we then, once you know what that is, demonstrate that you have those skills? And it's the same thing for building your career path. You need to know where you're trying to go, and then you map the skills that you already have and figure out what resources and opportunities you can create for yourself to build those things. Whether you're trying to stay at the same company or go to a new company, job descriptions are always a great source of truth for what you need to do next. And or just go out and find people in your network who have already done that. They might be able to give you insider information too. It really all comes down to getting more information. Because once you know where you're trying to go, connecting the dots feels like a pretty easy task. That's just a matter of, managing your own resources, your own time. You just have to go seek out a little bit more information to know where you're trying to go. So I always recommend if you can learn on the job at a place you're being paid to do so, you should try that first, right? If there's someone in your department who is doing work like that, maybe they're a little swamped and they wouldn't mind a little extra help, and maybe you have a little extra time and you can work that out to try that out, right? A good engineering manager is going to want to help you do the things that you're really interested in because that's part of your satisfaction as an employee at that company. And we've all witnessed what happens when employees are unsatisfied with their jobs now, right? And that is our current market of supply and demand of talent and the employers that want to hire the talent. And we all know that we have to recommit to sort of re-recruiting our existing staff as well. A good engineering manager is going to be invested in helping you with that. So step number one is to see if there are opportunities in your current role to build some of those skills in a way that you're paid for it, right? And then it's professional experience. Other great opportunities are side projects, right? Especially if it's something super unique, you can, if you have the time and the inclination and you want to build something that you could publish to the web that people could see, because ultimately like your ability to do the thing will trump whatever your educational background is anyway. If you can do the thing in tech, it doesn't actually matter how you acquired that knowledge if you can demonstrate that you can do it. This is especially true for like front-end, self-taught front-end engineers. If you have a beautiful portfolio, nobody cares if you taught yourself or you have a CS degree or whatever, because you've demonstrated that you could do the work. So portfolios are great. They're not possible for everything, right? If you are trying to get into cloud engineering or something, maybe a portfolio is not the right move, but there are probably still side projects you can do where you can demonstrate knowledge. Also, if it is cloud, we have our next thing, which is online courses, certifications, which are not applicable to every aspect of tech. But if they are applicable to you, those matter a lot, especially if it's something like cloud, which is huge, right? Cloud engineering is a big deal. My advice to people breaking into tech for the first time, if they're not super attached to being a web designer these days, is that they should look at cloud engineering first before JavaScript, because there are more jobs out there. And the JavaScript market for entry-level engineers is pretty saturated right now. It's really hard to stand out. And companies haven't quite figured out how to grow their junior engineers properly yet, and or they're just too lazy to do so, which is regrettable on a number of fronts. But cloud engineering could be a great option for someone who wants to break into tech at all, because you can get there through certificates, many of which companies like Google have free things that you can use to study for, because they want to encourage people to get in the field. So you have, what can you get out of your current job? You can get side projects, portfolios, and you have certifications, online courses, things like that. And also don't knock any experience that you have that's relevant but not directly related. Truthfully, I think that everyone needs to have some sort of a personal board of directors, even if it's only a couple people, and they should not be people you work with right now. They should very specifically be other people because you want that point of view that is not attached to protecting or defending the place where you currently work. There's a lot of ways to acquire mentors throughout your career. And also don't knock peer mentors. It doesn't always have to be somebody who has, when I first got into tech, I was like, well, I am not going to find a mentor because I am a queer woman in tech and there just aren't that many people like me who are like a decade or more ahead of me. And while they do exist, like they're so busy and popular that I wouldn't want to bother them, right? That's like one extreme way people look at mentorship, or they feel like they're going to be a burden to the person that they're asking these questions of. And then on the reverse side, you have the people that will just cold DM you and be like, I want to pick your brain, which is super disrespectful. Don't do that. What you should do, and what you can always do, is if you follow somebody on Twitter and you really like their philosophies, right? And you're like, ask them a very specific question and you will probably get an answer. The more specific the question and the more uniquely qualified that person is to answer it, the more likely you are to get an answer. That doesn't mean you're going to have like a whole mentorship relationship with them, but people like me, like I love answering thoughtful DMs. I don't like to pick your brain. I don't like can we schedule time to talk? No. But there are people that I have built mentorship relationships with that started on social media, because we had shared interests and we were tweeting back and forth or whatever. So that's social media is one way you can do that. Another way you could do that is by, reaching out to people either you can get an intro through or who you've known at previous jobs. There are a couple people that are on sort of my larger personal board of directors. They're not necessarily consulted at every decision, but like I like to talk to them a few times a year, right? And some of these people are hiring managers who interviewed me for a job and that I didn't take. Some of them are people I've worked for before, right? And this becomes easier the longer you've been in the field, where you just like meet people through your network. But you do need to network. And in the days before the pandemic, we did a lot of that in real life, and now you have to do a lot of that online. But you should still be networking and growing that and then keeping in touch with those people. But if you don't have those options, sometimes you can find mentors from boot camp that you went to, right? And if you went to college for a CS degree, you should definitely have people that are supporting you in this capacity. Not every boot camp does a great job of this, but sometimes there are people you can talk to about that, right? I have a really dear friend who actually started as he was working for the boot camp that I went to, and he helped me get my second job. His primary job responsibilities were not finding graduates jobs, but he's like a guy who knows a bunch of guys, right? And he was like, you gotta talk to these people. You gotta talk to these people. And he had to convince me because it was a front end role. And at that point I was pretty sure that I wanted to write Go. And he says, you gotta do this. And I said, okay, fine, I'll talk to the guy. And I get on the phone and he's like, I've been looking for someone to build me an accounting system in Go. I haven't even published that job description. So you need to talk to people and you need to say yes when they give you opportunities, have those conversations. So it's just putting yourself out there. But what I think that a lot of people have identified folks that they might want to be mentors and they're just not sure how to approach that conversation. So let me give you the breakdown of how to do that, which is you don't do do you have time to talk? Can I pick your brain? Blah, blah, blah. You don't do that. You start with a very specific question and you ask that very specific question. And then if they answer, then you can continue to ask very specific questions. And then organically, this either grows into, a professional friendship, or it doesn't. It doesn't always. So you should do more of this than you think. But you have to start those conversations in a way that's respectful, that doesn't take up too much of their time, that recognizes that they're busy and that they don't have to do this. But you're not a burden all the time, right? I think sometimes people are afraid to reach out because they're like, well, this person's busy. This is unpaid labor that I'm asking them to do. Like, stop. I have spent so much of my career trying to help, especially underestimated, underrepresented folks get into tech, that it's wild to me when people say, I didn't really want to bother you about this because like you're doing all this other stuff. I'm like, this is my brand, man. Let me help. There are a lot of people like me who are invested in this. And if you are respectful with our time and our Twitter DMs, we will help you. And I have people that I met on Twitter who are friends now, right? And when they're making job decisions, I'm on their personal board of directors, and it started on Twitter. So Ask the specific question and let it happen organically, and do that with more than one person, because not all of them are going to have time to build a relationship with you. But when they are, it's magic. So, first of all, this is the same attitude that lands us all drowning in tech debt. This is not a now thing. This is a later thing because the sky is on fire and we have to only do the immediate things right now. And I will tell you, as a survivor of some pretty epic burnout, that that is not sustainable. And you have to do those other things that bring you satisfaction in your life, in your professional life, in your personal life, right? You know, it can get so bad to the point where people are canceling haircuts or doctor's appointments because something is on fire at work. Stop. Don't do that. You have a life outside of work. This is just a job and you need to make time for that, right? Those are extreme examples, but a less extreme example is somebody saying, well, I can't schedule this call with this mentor or take this course because I need to be doing this other thing. Talk to your manager. Sometimes you do have deadlines that you're pushing for, and there are some managers who will consider some amount of studying for things that are not related to your specific job, that those are things you should do in your free time. But you definitely have time to have a 30-minute coffee chat with a mentor every now and then in the middle of your workday, for the same reason that you definitely have time to go get your haircut or to go to the doctor or to run an errand, because it's that level of important for your satisfaction in your job and in your life. The thing is, good managers will sit there and say, all right, if this person is not happy right here, is there somewhere else we could fit them in this organization? And they would prefer to do that than to have regrettable turnover, right? They'd prefer to find you a place where you'd be happy. And they might even be happy to help you figure out how to transition from one place to another, especially if you're in a bigger company. An earlier stage startup, that's not always possible. But what you are trying to learn at an early stage startup is maybe different, right? Depending on where you're at. If you're at an early stage startup, you're probably learning a lot of the how to fight the fires, how to prioritize, how to avoid tech debt where it's possible, then it isn't always, how to operate under that level of stress. And maybe you have more responsibilities than you would have in a bigger organization. If you are at a bigger company and you have options to do things like change teams, your manager should want to help you find a place where you're happy. If your manager does not want that or is holding you back for any reason that is not legitimate, you should think about looking for another job anyway. That's not a behavior that should just be like, okay, I will just accept that that's what it's going to be like here. That's a culture smell. There are a lot of smaller tech companies, right? Earlier stage tech companies where people haven't even really thought about what the engineering career ladder looks like at all. And so if you are operating at a company where that doesn't exist yet, you might have to help push for that conversation. There are a couple of factors to come into play. One of which is that you should have done your market research. What is this job, these responsibilities? What is this looking like in other places? And what is the comp? Because one of the first things that your manager is going to have to do as they consider this is figure out what that's going to cost them, right? And then you also have to be able to, depending on what it is, right? If you're trying to get a promotion from software engineer to senior software engineer, right? That's pretty straightforward. But if you're trying to go from senior software engineer to ML engineer and there's no ML engineer role at the company, you may also have to demonstrate a business need. And if you help your manager figure out what that business need is, your manager probably has to run this by other people. They probably don't get to make this decision in a bubble, especially if it involves paying you more money. So help them by being able to tell them what that business case is for this role to exist. And then the last piece is that any manager who is concerned with any sort of equitable pay, closing pay gaps, whatever, is also level setting across a group of people. So whether you're going to be able to be successful in some of this is also dependent on whether there are other people who are also at your level who have not been promoted yet. If it's just you and you're the unicorn and the company is small and there aren't a lot of career ladders created yet, it could be a little bit easier than if you're in a place where it's suddenly like, well, if I promote you, then I have to promote all these other people too. So just like be aware that that might be a thing you have to deal with. The more of these sort of concerns that your manager might have that you can preempt as you go into this discussion, the better, especially the business case, if it's a new role that hasn't existed yet. Well, the first thing that I would ask is a gut check, right? And the gut check is that if $1 million landed in your lap tomorrow, would you quit your job on the spot? The minute the answer to that question is yes, you should think heavily about maybe it's time to leave anyway, maybe even for reasons you don't know how to explain or articulate yet. Not everyone is self-aware enough to be like, the vibe is off, the culture is not a good fit, I just don't feel like I'm going to get the growth. First thing is the gut check. And if the gut check is like, yeah, I don't really like this job, it's probably time to start looking anyway. And if the answer is like, no, actually, I think I still have things to learn here, then what I would suggest is try to identify what those things are, right? Especially as you get later in your career, I think it's important for people to have a thing that they are trying to learn or do at a job when they take it. I do not advise taking jobs at companies because you like their mission or because you like what you are perceiving from the outside as their culture. That is a recipe to end up at a company where they exploit their employees in the name of saving the planet in some capacity. You should have something that you are trying to accomplish there. And it might be to get promoted from job A to job B. It might be that you want to work on a specific project. It might be that you want to be with a company while they IPO, right? Or you want to be at a company when they're in the early stages, and maybe you'll take it to IPO if you have a good time. You know, like what is that thing you're trying to learn or do with that company? Even if you're already at a place and you don't know the answer to that right away, think about it. If you're early in your career and the answer is, I'm generally trying to learn and get more exposure to tech, that can be legitimate. The later you get in your career and the more specified you get, the more you should actually be able to answer that question if you're actively pursuing growing your career, right? Which you don't always have to do either. You don't always have to be in a place of high ambition, driving as hard and as fast as you can towards the next pay bump or the next title increase. You don't have to do that. We make a lot of money in this industry, and at any point in time, you can just pause. You will continue to learn just by doing the work that you're doing, right? You will become a better teammate, right? You will get better at knowing that code base and knowing how to solve problems. Like you're going to be learning in the job anyway. You don't always have to go at the fastest pace possible. But if you do want to go at the fastest pace possible, then you should know what you're trying to get out of that job. And if you know that, and once you achieve that, then you can either look for the next thing, or you could say, do I need to look for that next thing outside, right? But having that thing that you're trying to learn can help shape some of this information too. I think a lot of people will sometimes, they're afraid to career hop because either somebody has told them or they come from some other industry. Like when I was in accounting, you needed to stay at companies at least 2 years or people thought you were a flake. 2 years is a long time, especially in tech land. And here, I think people still bring that attitude in, but it's get rid of, unburden yourself with that, throw it out, ditch it. That's not how things work over here. You have your obvious things, like if you're being discriminated against or harassed in any way, like that's a legitimate reason to leave. If you feel like you're not being treated fairly by your manager, or you're not getting enough feedback to grow, or you don't have opportunities, a major financial change in the company or the managerial structure is a legitimate reason to move on to a new job. There are a lot more reasons to leave than to stay generally. So find your reason why, what you're trying to do there, and then accomplish that thing and then move on. But that's only if you're trying to be heavily ambitious. You are also allowed to work in tech jobs for more than 1 year if you would like to, if you're happy and you're satisfied. You don't always have to punch it. I would say two things. One of which is if you did graduate from a boot camp, I would highly recommend taking some additional intro to comp sci classes on edX. Get a little bit more familiar with some of the things that your CS counterparts have already learned. They will be learning a little bit more about some of the modern tools that you learned that they maybe didn't touch in college, but trying to close that gap a little bit is helpful, especially with topics like systems thinking or systems design. The second thing is that you should continue to work on your soft skills, because there are hiring managers who will choose the team player over the highly credentialed jerk And the industry's changing, right? It's becoming less and less acceptable to be a jerk. There are people, especially people who are come from underestimated backgrounds, right, who are really committed to being team players because they've been in a place where they've been marginalized and it's very important for them to include people. And then there are people in the middle who, are smart and good at their job, but maybe haven't really thought about soft skills as something that they need to grow. And then you have your like super smart jerks who need an intervention. Everybody could benefit from learning how to be a better team player. Your communication, collaboration, cooperation, software is a team sport. That's not in dispute anymore. You need an entire team. And it's not just engineers. It's not just that you need to learn how to work with other engineers. You need to learn how to work with your product manager, your designers, your go-to-market teams. Look, without your go-to-market teams, you're building a product that nobody's buying. Do you feel smart now? Like, it's a team sport. So your soft skills, they matter, and you need to continue to build them intentionally the same way that you do your technical skills. It will one day or another make or break the difference about whether you get the job or not. And you need to care, not just because you should be a good person and you should strive to make your teammates' lives better the same way that they make yours better, but it will give you a professional advantage.